Hello, my name is Carly Worsham, and I am here to explain how I use the Assure model to create my copyright rules lesson um, for the library. First, I want to quickly review what Assure stands for. A is for Analyze Learners, S is for State Standards and Objectives, S is select strategies and resources. U, utilize resources. R, require learner participation. And E, evaluate and revise. Okay, first I need to analyze my students. The general characteristics of my students are that they are fifth graders who exhibit a high level of motivation and enthusiasm toward learning and projects that include technology, such as online research projects. Second, their entry competencies include being digital natives. They are experienced users of online resources and tools, um, very familiar with and able to use Google Slides, Canva, Kahoot effectively, um, but they have a limited understanding of copyright rules with little to no knowledge of what plagiarism is or how to avoid it. They don't know anything about fair use, public domain, or Creative Commons. So, this lesson is going to cover all of those things. Um, the learning differences I considered were that some students with dyslexia will have access to text to speech or adaptive text as needed. The ELLs will be paired up with students who can help them throughout the lesson activities. Um, Gifted students will have the opportunity to do replacement tasks instead of the quiz that the rest will do at the end to show understanding. I considered visual, auditory, interpersonal, and kinesthetic learners when planning this lesson. They will be sat at tables of four um, with a mixed group of levels and learning differences and needs at each table. Okay, my standards that I will be covering start with Tech App 1B, which is students will demonstrate an understanding of copyright and Creative Commons when using digital resources. The TEK I chose is to demonstrate understanding of information ethics by giving credit to sources to avoid plagiarism. The library strand I chose will be learners will identify and practice the ethical and legal use of intellectual property, including copyright, fair use, and Creative Commons. And then my lesson objectives are they will define copyright and tell why it's important, and then learn about plagiarism and ways to avoid it, such as fair use, public domain, Creative Commons, and of course, citing their resources. I selected a number of strategies and resources for this lesson, starting with the presentation I created. It will be used for a whole group mini lesson about copyright rules. There will be I will use turn and talk and small group discussions and a vocabulary and scenario match activity. Individuals and partners will answer Kahoot questions about vocabulary terms and scenarios where students must apply what they know about copyright rules and all related terms from the lesson. They love a Kahoot, and I can check the accuracy reports to see how well they did individually. A replacement task could be used for the gifted students who need a more project based learning response to show their understanding. They could write or type their own scenarios and creative stories about possible copyright infringement. They might use a Google slide to do that or some other presentation form. The resources that I will need are the presentation slides for my library copyright rules lesson, a large interactive screen or BenQ board. I will use vocabulary and scenario matching activity cards that are laminated for use in all fifth grade classes, and I will use iPads and Kahoot quiz to assess whether they learned or what they learned about copyright rules. Okay, the next slide is telling all about the resources I will utilize. First, I will preview the resources. I will check the slides in the presentation for accuracy and typos, making sure it's ready to share and accessible. I will make sure the vocabulary match activity cards are ready and that have a correct match, and the Kahoot questions and the answers are all entered correctly. I'll make sure to practice presenting the lesson aloud to make sure the lesson flows smoothly. I'll prepare the resources by first gathering the materials for the lesson. I'll need the laptop, vocab matching cards, iPads, paper, pencils, and then I will set up the slideshow for presentation mode and prepare the screen to practice it briefly, and then prep vocab cards and the Kahoot questions and answers. I will prepare the environment by checking to make sure the tables and chairs are set up for small groups of 4 and partners so that they can see and hear. I'll connect the laptop to the BenQ and have vocab matching cards close at hand, paper and pencils available for students to take notes on and respond on paper. I'll also make sure to prepare the learners. I'll pose a hypothetical situation demonstrating how knowing copyright rules has real-world applications. This will include a rationale statement showing the importance of learning about how the law protects your original work. I'll also go over learning objectives and standards that this lesson is going to address. I will provide the learning experience by a librarian-led copyright rules presentation, learning experience that would provide learners with the knowledge they need to be successful on the assignment that they'll be assigned by their classroom teacher. Since this lesson is given in a lecture style, it's more teacher-led than usual. However, I will still require learner participation. I will make sure the students listen attentively during the presentation, possibly by taking notes while the librarian presents the copyright rules presentation lesson. Students will answer questions as posed by the librarian throughout the lesson. Students will collaborate with table groups or partners to complete vocabulary and scenario matching activity, and they'll get feedback from partners and group members as well as the librarian during this activity. The librarian will also have a chance to clear up misconception as I walk around during the lesson. The students will show me what they learned after the presentation with immediate feedback by participating in a Kahoot using their iPads and the BenQ board to answer a variety of questions that cover the content of the librarian's presentation. Gifted students may create a Google or Canvas slide in which they write scenarios or a creative writing piece that shows that they understand the different terms and concepts covered in the lesson, such as copyright law, examples of plagiarism, fair use, public domain, and Creative Commons, and explain how to cite a resource properly. Edit and revise. Evaluate and revise. The librarian will use the rubric on the following slide to evaluate the impact of the lesson on student learning. Gaps in learning can be addressed by making instructional adjustments. The classroom teacher and librarian will meet when the students are in the middle and at the end of the classroom research project to assess whether there are further gaps in learning with these concepts in regard to copyright law. Additional lessons on copyright or citing sources, for example, may be needed to be planned and implemented by the librarian. In addition to librarian evaluating students' understanding of concepts taught during the copyright lesson, students may also evaluate their own learning experience using a simple rubric as shown on the very last slide following the librarian's rubric. Here's the rubric I intend to use to evaluate how much they learned about copyright law. So if they clearly can demonstrate and explain copyright as a law that protects original work, books, videos, etc., and the creator's rights, then I will consider that an exemplary level of understanding. Proficient, they can accurately describe copyright, but they miss maybe one or two types of protected media, that would be considered a proficient level. Um, Developing level would be providing a vague definition, um, or they might confuse it with other roles. And then finally, beginning level, level one, they're unable to define copyright or its purposes. Um, for plagiarism awareness, if they can identify specific examples of plagiarism, for example, copying text or downloading music without credit, then and explain why it's unethical, that would be an exemplary level of understanding. If they are able to, identify common examples of plagiarism but struggle to explain the ethical component, that is a proficient level. If they can identify only the most obvious form of plagiarism, like copying someone else's text, that's a developing level. And then finally, if they don't understand what plagiarism is or what constitutes it, that is a beginning level. Um, in regard to public domain and Creative Commons, if they can correctly identify the difference between public domain and Creative Commons and how to use them, that would be considered an exemplary level of understanding. If they understand both concepts but might confuse the specific requirements for attribution, that would be considered a proficient level. If they only recognize one of the two concepts, that would be developing. And if they don't understand, or if they're unfamiliar with public domain or Creative Commons, that is a beginning level. With fair use application, if they're able to explain 4 factors of fair use, such as purpose, nature, amount, and effect on the market, and apply them to a scenario, then that would be an exemplary level of understanding. If they can list the factors of fair use but struggle to apply them to a real world example, that's proficient. If they recognize the term fair use but cannot name a specific factor, then that's developing. And then if they can't explain what fair use is or when it applies, that would be a beginning level. To avoid copyright infringement, if they can demonstrate multiple ways to avoid plagiarism, such as quoting or paraphrasing, citing resources, or using fair use, public domain, or Creative Commons, that is exemplary level. If they can identify ways to avoid plagiarism but miss the key steps like proper citation formatting, that's proficient. If they can name one way to avoid plagiarism, like don't copy it, but lack a process, that's developing. And then if they don't know how to avoid plagiarizing at all, that would be a beginning level. And finally, if they are at the end, I would like the student to evaluate themselves as well. They will respond just with a simple check mark under the emoji that best matches their response to the lesson by completing this rubric for themselves. The presentation explained copyright rules in a way I can understand. Matching activity allowed me to practice what I was learning during the lesson. The Kahoot allowed me to show what I learned during the lesson. I feel confident in what I know about copyright rules. And finally, if they have any questions still about copyright law after my presentation, there's space for them to type that or write that in the box at the bottom. So this would just be a bonus just to help me know moving forward how they feel about copyright rules and what they know about them, and if I need to do any further lessons or reteaching on this topic.